Hey everybody. I wanted to talk about a practical solution to help people that have PTSD, and I want to talk about working memory and the impairment of working memory. Working memory is the sort of memory that allows us to recall what we're doing at any given moment, to process it, and to move from task to task. And I have this book that I bought. It's called Understanding Working Memory. And the basic premise of the book is to help children that have a working memory impairment. And I'm going to read about anxiety and working memory to give you an idea. Anxiety disorders. Every morning when 10-year-old Nicole gets dropped off at her elementary school, she gets out of her mother's car and heads straight to class. Nicole keeps a small notebook of her assignments for homework and upcoming tests. Most students rely on constant reminders, but she likes to be sure she remembers everything she needs to do. She finishes all of the homework on time, often even turning it in early. During the week of a test, Nicole becomes nervous and can be found studying after school at the library while her friends are in the playground waiting for their parents to pick them up. On test days, Nicole is nervous and spends any class downtime studying for the test. She even studies while her teacher is lecturing in the classroom. Nicole's test grades are the highest in her class, and she receives top marks on all of her homework and class assignments. And this is a discussion of what working memory is. Although some may look at Nicole and think she pushes herself too hard, Nicole has a healthy level of anxiety. Her anxiety helps her maintain a state of readiness, and her preparation results in her above-average grades. There is a continuum for anxiety levels. On one end, there is healthy anxiety, like Nicole's, that helps the individual succeed in daily tasks, and on the other end is an unhealthy expression or anxiety disorders. The threshold for a student with normal stress and an anxiety disorder is determined in part by the effect it has on daily activities. Nicole has a high threshold for stress, and her anxiety enhances her academic performance. However, this is not often the case for the students with an anxiety disorder. These students have greater difficulty focusing on tasks in class, as well as in daily life. Their anxiety can overwhelm them, and they struggle with remembering multiple pieces of information at a time as a result. Mike, 14 years old, is in his first year in school. He is not doing well in any of his classes. He is noticeably quiet in his classes and spends the class time staring off into space. On test days, he skips class and hides out in the bathroom until the class period has ended. Since he misses his tests, he is doing poorly in school, which makes him feel even more stressed. In science class, Mike had to present a poster on the atom. When it was his turn to speak, he noticed a group of students laughing at the back of the room. They were looking at a picture on one of their phones, but Mike thought they were laughing at him. So he ran out of the room in the middle of the presentation. Mike is an example of someone who has performance anxiety, an unhealthy level of anxiety that negatively affects his performance in school. He is caught in a vicious cycle. He avoids taking tests and doing class projects, so he has bad grades in his classes, which in turn makes him more stressed out and more likely to avoid future assessments. Unlike Nicole, Mike has a lower threshold for anxiety, which has a negative impact on his grades. Worry is the underlying feature of anxiety disorders. Worry can be characterized by frequent unease and allowing one's mind to dwell on problems. Excessive worry can overtake a person's thought process, a phenomenon referred to as an attentional bias. You focus on something due to reoccurring thoughts. And I just want to say that in our case, the attentional bias is on antisocial behavior. So if you've noticed, you have a lot of rumination about morbid things that like wars or maybe even the pandemic or something that is out of your control that's created by these antisocial people. You have an attentional bias for that, as opposed to other people that haven't gone through narcissism. They are able to retrain their focus on things that they can control. So that's the basis of your anxiety disorder. You focus on something due to recurring thoughts. The worry can be so invasive that it takes center stage in cognitive activities, replacing other more important information. So let's say you're going through the day and you have these invasive thoughts about psychopathy and antisocial behavior. You may look at people that are promiscuous and assume that they're psychopathic. You may look at people that are greedy and assume that they're psychopathic. So this intentional bias is what fuels this rumination that you have about this topic. And the goal of working memory is to be able to retrain your focus on things that are more relevant to the present moment and that will propel you into the future as opposed to having you stay in one place. So I'm going to continue the discussion. Anxiety bombards working memory, making it difficult to process multiple pieces of information at the same time. For instance, a highly anxious student who is taught how to multiply fractions may not be able to solve a problem after the lesson because they spent the whole session worrying about the new, harder material. And how often does this happen? It's like catastrophic thinking. For example, you may be doing the laundry and worrying about the stimulus check, or you may be eating and worrying about how you're going to pay the rent. These sorts of invasive thoughts that you can't control in the moment, they need to go. And the way you can do that is by strengthening the working memory. For instance, a highly anxious student, throughout the lesson, their mind is overtaken by excessive worry, and they were not able to focus on learning the information. So, this is the DSM diagnosis for anxiety, just general anxiety, not PTSD. Restlessness or feelings keyed up or on edge, being easily fatigued, difficulty concentrating, or mind going blank. That happens a lot. Irritability, muscle tension, sleep disturbances. Working memory and anxiety in the brain. Brain imaging studies on individuals with anxiety disorder have reported that the prefrontal cortex, the home of working memory, is affected by anxiety. Anxiety induces a heavy cognitive load and impairs an individual's working memory, making it much less efficient. While the student may have the requisite working memory capacity to process a lesson on a new topic, when they experience anxiety, their working memory capacity is minimized, and this explains why it's difficult to learn new material when you've come out of narcissism, because the working memory impairment that you have does not allow you to retrain your focus and program yourself in a way that you can receive new information, making it much more effortful to pay attention to the lesson. Here's an analogy to understand the effect of anxiety on learning. When you eat something extremely spicy, the capsaicin from the pepper binds to the pain receptors of your tongue and causes pain. Even when the capsaicin is removed, the heat and pain remain, and other foods will not be as flavorful. So, the analogy here is, once you get out of a toxic relationship, all of your thoughts are trained on what this individual may do to you, what kind of retribution they may seek, what sort of things they're saying about you. So the anxiety of knowing that this person is a liar and a thief and all of these things, it keeps invading your mind to the point where you can't internalize new information. And the goal of improving working memory, and this is an effortful process, it doesn't happen overnight, you have to train it every single day, like a muscle, is to retrain the frontal lobe to think in the moment and think on task. And I'm going to give you the tools to do that, because this is the cure to the problem. Instead of ruminating on the problem, you have to retrain your brain to think in the present and in the future. So then it says, a similar process occurs when you have an anxious thought in mind. It remains prominent in your PFC, diluting any new information that has to be processed and remembered. The prefrontal cortex, PFC. Can the brain really change? Researchers have found that chronic stress has an impact on the makeup of the human brain. Anxiety leads to an increased level of cortisol, the stress chemical of the brain, causing a chain reaction that leads to the production of fewer neurons and more of the nerve covering myelin. Cortisol levels in the brain affect the pathways between two major neurological structures: the hippocampus, the home of long-term memory, and the amygdala, the emotional control center. Anxiety disrupts the connection between the hippocampus and the amygdala, and they do not communicate as well as they should. The stem cells created during stress produce a myelin sheath over the nerve cells in our prefrontal cortex, preventing new neurons from being formed that would otherwise improve the path from the hippocampus to the PFC, those improving our memory. The take-home message is that chronic stress will hamper the student's ability to use working memory and learn effectively. I'm going to continue this because it's a long article, but I'm going to continue this in the next video, and I'm going to talk about tools that you can use every day in order to strengthen working memory.